Sarah's hands trembled as she held the torn diary page she'd found crumpled in the trash. The words written in her 13-year-old stepson's handwriting cut through her heart like shattered glass. "I hate that she tries to act like my mom. My real mom is dead, and she can never replace her. I wish Dad never married her. I just want to disappear. Udult." The page was stained with what could only be tears from a boy who had been building walls around his heart for 3 long years. It had been exactly 247 days since Sarah Martinez had walked down the aisle to marry David, believing she was gaining not just a husband, but the son she'd always dreamed of having. Jake had been only 10 when his mother Elena died in a car accident, and Sarah thought her love could help heal his wounded heart. She thought wrong. If you've ever felt your family falling apart, this story will give you hope. Like this video and subscribe to our channel if you believe in Mary's power to heal families. To create a spiritual chain of prayer for all broken families, write HEAL in the comments below. Let's unite our faith and ask Mary to intercede for every family watching this. For 3 years, Sarah had tried everything. She'd learned to make Elena's special pancakes, kept Jake's mother's photos throughout the house, and even learned Spanish phrases Elena used to say. But every gesture of love was met with cold rejection. Every good morning was answered with silence. Every attempt to help with homework resulted in Jake storming to his room. The family dinners she'd imagined were battlefields of tension where David sat helplessly between his grieving son and his heartbroken wife. What made it worse was that Sarah could see glimpses of the sweet boy Jake used to be. His father showed her videos of Jake before his mother's death, laughing, playing soccer, full of life. But that boy had died along with Elena, leaving behind a shell of anger and pain that Sarah couldn't penetrate no matter how hard she tried. The diary entry revealed Jake's deepest fear, that accepting Sarah's love would somehow betray his mother's memory. Little did Sarah know, Jake had been carrying a guilt so heavy it was crushing his young spirit. He believed that if he loved his stepmother, he would be abandoning the woman who had given him life. David worked long hours as a contractor, often coming home exhausted to find his wife in tears and his son locked in his bedroom. The man who had once been Sarah's rock was slowly crumbling under the weight of his fractured family. Their marriage, once filled with hope and joy, was suffocating under the strain of a child's grief they couldn't heal. But what Sarah didn't know, as she sat crying over that diary page, was that Jake had been making secret trips somewhere, trips that would soon reveal Mary's plan to unite their broken hearts in a way none of them could have imagined. Sarah had dreamed of being a mother since she was a little girl, playing with dolls in her childhood bedroom. At 38, after years of failed relationships and fertility struggles, she had resigned herself to a childless life. Then David walked into the coffee shop where she worked, a widowed father with kind eyes and a broken heart, carrying a picture of his son in his wallet like a sacred treasure. When David proposed after 18 months of courtship, Sarah felt like God had finally answered her prayers. She would become not just a wife, but a mother. The first signs of trouble appeared during their honeymoon. Jake refused to speak to Sarah on their wedding video call, turning his back to the camera and walking away when David tried to include him in their joy. "He just needs time," David had whispered. But even then, Sarah noticed the worry lines deepening around her new husband's eyes. What followed were 3 years of heartbreak disguised as daily life. Sarah would pack Jake's special lunches with little notes, only to find them untouched in his backpack. She attended every soccer game, cheering from the sidelines, while Jake pretended she didn't exist. When she tried to establish bedtime routines or help with school projects, Jake would scream, "You're not my mother! Stop trying to replace her!" The words became daggers that found their mark every single time. The breaking point came during Jake's 6th grade parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Rodriguez gently explained that Jake's grades had plummeted. He'd been getting into fights, and his essays all centered around themes of loss and abandonment. He wrote a story about a boy whose father betrays his dead mother by bringing a stranger into their home. she said softly, glancing between David and Sarah. "I think Jake needs professional help. Family therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez became weekly torture chambers. Jake would sit in defiant silence while Sarah tried to explain her love for him through tears. "I'm not trying to replace your mother," she would plead. "I just want to love you too." Jake's response was always the same: crossed arms, turned away face, and stone-cold silence that spoke louder than any scream. The strain began destroying Sarah and David's marriage. They stopped talking about Jake's behavior to avoid arguing. Their romantic dinners became strategy sessions about handling the latest crisis. David started working overtime to escape the tension at home, leaving Sarah alone with a child who treated her like an unwelcome intruder. Friends stopped inviting them to family gatherings because Jake's outbursts made everyone uncomfortable. Then came the night that shattered Sarah's remaining hope. She woke at 2 a.m. to find David frantically searching the house. Jake's bed was empty, his window open, his bicycle gone. For 8 terrifying hours, they drove through Phoenix neighborhoods, called hospitals, and filed police reports while Sarah's heart broke completely. She realized that her love, the greatest gift she had to offer, had driven a child to run away into the night. When police found Jake sleeping in a park 20 miles away, he looked at Sarah with such pure hatred that she knew her dream of motherhood had become a nightmare for everyone involved. 3 days after Jake's return from his runaway night, Sarah found herself alone in her kitchen at 3:17 a.m., surrounded by the suffocating silence of a house where love had turned to resentment. David slept fitfully upstairs, emotionally exhausted from the police search, while Jake remained locked behind his bedroom door, refusing to speak to anyone. Sarah stared at the small statue of the Virgin Mary that had belonged to her grandmother, the only religious item she'd kept after years of questioning whether God truly heard the prayers of broken hearts. With trembling hands, she picked up the blue and white figurine, remembering her abuela's words. "Mija, when your heart is shattered and you have nowhere else to turn, speak to La Virgencita. She understands a mother's love better than anyone." Sarah had never considered herself particularly religious, but desperation has a way of awakening dormant faith. "Blessed Mother," she whispered, tears falling onto the kitchen table. "I don't know how to pray properly, but I'm begging you to help me. This little boy has been through so much pain, and I'm making it worse. I never wanted to replace his mother. I just wanted to love him like you love all your children. Please, if you're listening, show me how to reach his heart. Show me how to honor Elena's memory while still being part of this family." Her voice broke as the words poured out like water from a cracked dam. "I see him suffering every day, carrying guilt that's too heavy for such small shoulders. His father is drowning trying to hold us all together. Our marriage is cracking under the weight of grief none of us knows how to carry. Please, Virgin Maria, if there's any way to heal this family, I surrender my pride, my hurt feelings, my own dreams of what motherhood should look like. Just help this precious boy find peace." Sarah prayed until dawn broke through the kitchen window, her tears creating small puddles on the table around Mary's statue. She felt empty but strangely peaceful, as if she'd finally released a burden she'd been carrying alone for too long. The first sign came 6 hours later. Sarah woke to find Jake's bedroom door slightly ajar, something that hadn't happened in months. When she peeked inside, she discovered his bed was empty. But this time, there was no panic, no open window, no missing bicycle. Instead, she found a note on his pillow, written in his careful handwriting. "Gone to visit Mom. We'll be back by dinner. Jake." For the first time in 3 years, Jake had voluntarily told her where he was going. But as Sarah held that note, she had no idea that Jake's destination would soon reveal the most beautiful miracle Mary had already set in motion. What she didn't know was that Jake had been visiting his mother's grave every week for months, having conversations with Elena that were about to change everything. Little did either of them realize Mary had been listening to prayers from both sides of this broken relationship, weaving together a plan that would honor both a mother's love and a stepmother's heart. Over the following weeks, Sarah began noticing small coincidences that felt too perfect to be random. The day after her desperate prayer, she found Elena's old recipe box while cleaning out a closet, something David had been searching for unsuccessfully for 3 years. Inside, tucked between cards for tres leches cake and pozole, was a small prayer card to Our Lady of Guadalupe with Elena's handwriting on the back. Para mi hijo, que siempre tenga una madre que lo ame. For my son, may he always have a mother who loves him. Sarah's hands trembled as she read those words. Elena had been praying for Jake to have a loving mother figure even before her death. But when Sarah tried to share this discovery with Jake, he exploded in rage. "You have no right to go through my mother's things," he screamed, snatching the recipe box away. "She wasn't talking about you. She would hate that you're here." The next sign came when Sarah's car mysteriously broke down outside St. Augustine Catholic Church, the same church where Elena had been a devoted parishioner. While waiting for a tow truck, Sarah wandered inside and discovered a beautiful shrine to the Virgin Mary covered in fresh flowers. An elderly woman kneeling there looked up with tear-filled eyes and said, "Are you Sarah?" Elena used to pray here every day for her son's future happiness. She had such faith that Our Lady would send him exactly what he needed. Mary's intervention was just beginning. If you want to see more amazing family miracles, subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. But Mary's gentle work triggered fierce resistance from an unexpected source. Elena's mother, Doña Carmen, had been Jake's primary babysitter since Elena's death, and she viewed Sarah as an intruder who had stolen her daughter's place. When Jake mentioned Sarah's questions about Elena's faith, Carmen's protective instincts turned venomous. "That woman has no right to Elena's memory," Carmen told Jake during one of his visits. "Your mother is turning in her grave watching this stranger play house with your father. You don't owe her anything, mijo. You're old enough to choose where you want to live." The poison worked swiftly. Jake's behavior toward Sarah grew more hostile than ever. He began openly defying her in front of David, testing whether his father would choose his son over his wife. When Sarah tried to enforce simple house rules, Jake would call Carmen, who would immediately drive over to rescue him from the woman who thinks she can replace Elena. David found himself caught in an impossible position. His mother-in-law threatened to petition for custody if he didn't control his wife's interference with Elena's son. Meanwhile, Sarah struggled with crushing guilt. Had Mary's signs been her imagination? Was she destroying a family that had already lost so much? The crisis erupted during Thanksgiving dinner. Carmen arrived uninvited, sat in the chair Sarah had prepared, and announced to the gathered family that Jake would be moving in with her permanently after Christmas. "It's what Elena would have wanted," she declared, staring directly at Sarah with cold hatred. Jake sat frozen as the adults around him began shouting, his young heart torn between loyalty to his mother's memory and a growing, terrifying realization that maybe, just maybe, Sarah's love wasn't the enemy he'd believed it to be. The Thanksgiving confrontation ended with Jake running from the table in tears, leaving behind a shattered family and unanswered questions. Carmen departed with smug satisfaction, confident she'd driven the final wedge between Sarah and the boy she claimed to protect. But what none of them knew was that Jake didn't run to his room. Instead, he grabbed his bike and pedaled frantically through the darkening Phoenix streets toward the one place where he felt closest to his mother. Greenwood Cemetery stood silent under the November moon as Jake collapsed beside Elena's headstone, his 13-year-old heart breaking under the weight of impossible choices. "Mama," he sobbed into the cold granite, "I don't know what to do anymore. Abuela says you hate Sarah, but I found your recipe box, and I saw your prayer. Did you really want me to have another mum? I'm so confused, and I miss you so much." As Jake's tears fell onto his mother's grave, a gentle breeze stirred the desert air, causing the small bouquet of white roses Sarah had secretly left there that morning to release a shower of petals around him. Jake had never seen flowers on his mother's grave except the ones he brought. Who else would care enough to honor Elena's memory? But the true miracle was yet to come. As Jake knelt there in his confusion, he noticed something glinting in the moonlight near the base of Elena's headstone. Half buried in the earth, as if recently revealed by rain, was a small silver medal. Jake brushed away the dirt with trembling fingers, revealing an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, the same image from the prayer card he'd angrily snatched from Sarah just weeks before. On the back of the medal, engraved in Elena's delicate script, were words that would change everything. Para Jake, que la Virgen te mande el amor que necesitas. Te amo para siempre. Mama. Translation. For Jake, may the Virgin send you the love you need. I love you forever. Mama. Jake's sobs echoed through the cemetery as the full weight of his mother's message hit him. Elena hadn't just prayed for him to have a loving mother. She had asked the Virgin Mary to send him exactly what he needed. And Sarah, with her patient love, her careful preservation of Elena's memory, her tears over his rejection, her gentle presence at family dinners where she was unwanted, Sarah was Mary's answer to his mother's prayer. I've been so stupid, Mama, Jake whispered, clutching the medal to his chest. I thought loving her meant forgetting you, but you sent her to love me because you can't be here to do it yourself. For the first time in 3 years, Jake felt the crushing guilt lift from his shoulders. His mother hadn't just given him permission to love his stepmother, she had prayed for it. Mary had orchestrated every detail, from the prayer card discovery to this moment of revelation. But as Jake prepared to bike home with his mother's blessing, he had no idea that Sarah was already on her way to find him, guided by the same maternal instinct that was about to unite their hearts forever. Sarah drove through the cemetery gates with tears blurring her vision, following an instinct she couldn't explain. After Jake had fled the Thanksgiving disaster, she'd searched everywhere. His room, the park, even Carmen's house. But something deeper than logic told her to check the one place that meant everything to him. As her headlights swept across the rows of headstones, they illuminated a small figure kneeling beside a familiar granite marker. Jake looked up as Sarah's car approached, his face streaked with tears, but no longer wearing the mask of hatred she'd grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, something had shifted in his dark eyes, a vulnerability she'd never witnessed before. Sarah turned off the engine and sat motionless for a moment, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile peace had settled over them. Sarah, Jake's voice was barely a whisper across the desert air. For the first time in 3 years, he hadn't called her by her first name with venom. Instead, it sounded almost like a question, a tentative reaching across the chasm of pain between them. I'm here, sweetheart, Sarah said softly, stepping out of the car and approaching slowly, as one might approach a wounded animal. I was worried about you. Jake held up the silver medal, moonlight catching its surface. I found this. It's from my mom. Look what she wrote. His voice cracked as he read the Spanish inscription aloud, then translated it with wonder. She asked the Virgin Mary to send me the love I needed. She was talking about you, wasn't she? Sarah knelt beside him, her knees touching the cold earth of Elena's grave, and for the first time, Jake didn't pull away. Your mother loved you so much that even knowing she might not be here to raise you, she prayed for someone who would. I never wanted to replace her, Jake. I just wanted to love you the way she would have wanted you to be loved. I know that now, Jake whispered. And then something miraculous happened. This boy, who had rejected every gesture of affection for 3 years, suddenly collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing against her shoulder like the broken child he'd been hiding behind walls of anger. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry I hurt you. I was scared that loving you meant forgetting her. Oh, my sweet boy, Sarah whispered, holding him tight as years of rejection and pain dissolved in that sacred moment. Loving me honors her memory because it means her prayers were answered. They sat together beside Elena's grave, stepmother and stepson finally united by the mother who had loved them both enough to trust the Virgin Mary with their future. The white roses Sarah had left that morning lay scattered around them like confetti from heaven, and Jake noticed them for the first time. "You've been bringing flowers to my mom?" he asked, amazement in his voice. "Every week for 2 years," Sarah admitted. "I wanted her to know I was taking care of you, even when you wouldn't let me." That night, David found them both asleep on the living room couch, Jake's head on Sarah's shoulder, her arms wrapped protectively around him, the Virgin medal clutched safely in his hand. 6 months after that miraculous night in the cemetery, the Martinez household had transformed into something Sarah had only dared dream about during those dark years of rejection. Jake now bounded down the stairs each morning, planting a kiss on Sarah's cheek before grabbing the lunch she packed with little notes. Notes he actually read and treasured. The boy who once locked himself away now helped Sarah cook Elena's recipes while sharing stories about his mother, teaching Sarah Spanish phrases Elena had loved, and making plans for family adventures. The most beautiful change came in how Jake talked about his family. At school, teachers noticed him referring to both my moms, Elena, who loved him from heaven, and Sarah, who loved him on earth. When friends asked about his complicated family situation, Jake would proudly explain how his mother had prayed to the Virgin Mary to send him exactly what he needed. "My mom knew she couldn't be here to take care of me," he'd say, with mature wisdom beyond his years. "So she asked Mary to find someone who could love me like she did." Even Carmen underwent a transformation, witnessing Jake's genuine happiness and seeing how Sarah honored Elena's memory with reverence and love gradually melted the grandmother's hostility. She began inviting Sarah to family gatherings, teaching her Elena's traditions, and acknowledging that perhaps Elena's prayers had indeed been answered in ways she hadn't initially understood. David watched his wife and son's relationship blossom with tears of gratitude. The man who had been drowning in guilt for remarrying finally found peace, knowing that Elena herself had orchestrated this beautiful blending of their family. Their marriage, once strained to its breaking point, grew stronger than ever as they united in raising Jake with the perfect balance of honoring his mother's memory while building new traditions together. What this miracle reveals is that the Virgin Mary specializes in healing the most complicated family wounds, those involving loss, fear, loyalty conflicts, and the delicate dance of blended families. Mary understands that sometimes the greatest love requires surrendering our own expectations and trusting divine timing. She knows that children's hearts need permission from those they've lost before they can open to new love. For every stepmother reading this who feels rejected, every stepchild struggling with guilt over loving again, every family torn between honoring the past and embracing the future, know that Mary sees your pain. She understands the unique challenges of blended families because she herself knows what it means to love a child who isn't biologically yours with fierce, protective devotion. Jake still visits Elena's grave weekly, but now Sarah accompanies him. Together, they thank Elena for her prayers and update her on their lives, knowing she orchestrated their love story from heaven. The silver medal hangs in Jake's room next to a photo of both his mothers, proof that love multiplies rather than divides when guided by Mary's tender hand. Have you experienced Mary's healing in your family? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more miraculous family healing stories.